welcome to the special Picky Bastards episode where we talk about the albums of 2017, the best albums. So each of us has picked our own album of the year, which will be revealed throughout the show. And we also picked a publication or a YouTube channel each, and we went with the top couple of albums from their list. So Nirmal went with the New York Times, who put St. Vincent's Mass Seduction in first and Residente's self-titled album in second. I picked The Guardian, who also went with St. Vincent, so we've gone with number 2 and 3 there, which was Kendrick Lamar's Damn and Scissors Control. And because Nick likes to think he's down with the kids, he went with the YouTube channel Deep Cuts, who put Somi's Petite Afrique in the top spot and Oxbow's Thin Black Duke at number 2. So I'm going to go to Nick to kick us off. So which of the 6 new albums did you think had the most to say about 2017, or was most relevant to the last year?
I guess I would go by hello, by the way. And Nirmal, do you want to say hello?
Yeah,
I feel like
Nirmal.
we missed that whole bit where we actually say hello to each other as if we get on.
Hello.
Well, it clearly doesn't matter if I'm here or not, so...
Not that much, anyway.
I said your name.
Oh, okay, well, thanks.
In passing.
Hello.
In passing. Yeah, so I guess I'll kick things off by saying that I thought Somi's Petite Afrique was probably my most 2017 kind of album in terms of its themes, its scope, and its production. And there's really a few reasons why I thought that was the case. I mean, essentially that it was a really... First of all, just as a general remark, what a voice this singer has. It's really... I mean, we hear an awful lot of new albums. We hear an awful lot of new vocalists come through. And I haven't heard anyone in a while who's got this much range and power without being over the top and without being getting into Mariah Carey territory. So no, I thought it was really, really good. I thought there was some really interesting political turns in the album. Alien was a really good example. And I think that's the one where it changes from the Sting track. So remind me.
So it changes from I'm an Englishman in New York to I'm an African in New York, doesn't it? So it's,
absolutely,
And a lot of other changes throughout the song, which vastly improve it, let's be honest.
Yeah, let's be clear on that, yes. It wasn't one of my favourite tracks before, but no, I thought it worked really, really well. And I also thought that what was the track? Black Enough?
Yeah.
Which just after Alien, on the first part of the album, was a really, really strong kind of narrative about the process of othering, which I thought was really interesting. So that really worked well for me. And I will also say another thing about it being a 2017 album from a production standpoint. Things are very polished at this point in production terms, I think, at this point in history, recording albums. And I think this was possibly the most polished of the albums I heard. It was really, really clean and crisp. Present, kind of in your face. I think it worked. I think it worked really, really well. So that would be my call. What do you think? What do the other think?
Nirmal?
Yeah. I mean, I just want to pick up on that production aspect. I remember listening to this with my fancy-ish headphones and...
Ooh, fancy.
Kind of, ish. And I'm talking to, Nick here, so.
Yeah, they're not fancy. I mean, just to be clear now. I don't know what they are, but they're not fancy. So, go ahead.
I was pretty stunned. It seemed like I could hear every instrument distinctly from each other, and her voice, and, very, very distinctly and clear all throughout. Actually reminded me of... like Sade or something, something really airy and...
How do you feel about that, Fran?
I mean,
you just grimaced when you said that.
I know, right?
But upsets me a little bit.
Very much.
That's all I'm going to say.
Much does. Because it also has, despite the, talk about the themes of it, but from a, just a kind of, if you think about it in terms of just the pop, it's very... It kind of floats above everything, her, especially because of her voice is so sort of light, like a meringue.
Yeah. Sade and meringues.
The food analogies. What was it with Queens of the Stone Age or something?
Snickers
It was
bars.
Snickers bars. Yeah, I remember now. Yeah.
Which so many people have said to me, actually, that bit about the Snickers bar was hilarious. I'm like, well, it wasn't at the time.
It wasn't at any point. It's just bizarre. That's what it was. I'm not going to give him credit for that. It's hilarious. No way.
Sorry, we interrupted you.
Yeah, we cut you off. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Oh.
Shall I take
for
over?
it.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, everything you've both been saying, I'm on board with. I think talking about it being a 2017 album, one of the things that really struck me with this album was the fact that it was a Muslim woman singing very openly about her religion and in a really sort of, we hear a lot of Christian albums or a lot of albums that have Christian influence on them.
You're a big Creed fan, are you? You listen to a lot of Creed music,
even to talk about Kendrick Lamar, who we'll be talking about later, there's a lot of references to God, isn't there? And you don't often hear the sort of an album from this perspective. And I think my favourite song on the track, and possibly my favourite track on this whole playlist, other than the National album, which obviously we'll talk about later, was Holy Room, which is just a really stunning song on this album. It shows her voice off probably the best of all the songs, and the chorus is just Allahu Akbar over and over again, but it's just so beautiful when she sings it. And I don't often get excited about anything religious, but that was a standout song for me, as was Black Enough, which you've mentioned. So yeah, my probably only thing that I really noticed about this album that distracted me a little bit was how obsessed she is with tea and coffee.
I did know.
Did you both notice that?
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah,
I've written down.
I don't know why I didn't make that note myself.
I've written down several of the times she mentions it just because I had to. So we've got I don't drink coffee, I drink tea, my dear, which is obviously from the Sting remix. She likes her tea with milk and rum and spices. Would you like coffee or some tea? How about milk or some honey? And I got bored of writing them down at that point. The woman's obsessed with tea. So yeah, as well as being writing brilliantly about religious, about race, and about life in Harlem, she's also fantastic about beverages. So.
Yes, it's very, very rock and roll. It reminds me of Lemmy a little bit in that respect, don't you think? I think it's got that rock and roll tone with the tea narrative.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. I mean, tea. She does mention rum.
Yeah,
with one of the tea references.
Yeah.
So, Fran, I mean, let me challenge you a little bit. If she was a, elderly white woman singing about tea, would it also be unusual?
Yeah, wouldn't it?
I think it would be.
There's like 4 different songs that mention tea. If she was like Mary Berry or someone who's come up in a podcast before, weirdly, then I'd probably understand
no one
that.
No, Mary Berry is probably, but
if she was the Queen of England,
she's extremely white.
I would get it.
Wasn't he like the mayor of New York and had some kind of drug escapade?
Who, Mary Berry? No, Mary Berry makes cakes.
Yeah, Mary Berry's a cook.
You remember the Idols album, the one that they sing Mary Berry?
Mary Berry's got
likes reggae and all that stuff. Let's not get back onto that. But yeah, the Petit Afrique, the Somi album.
I love that song. What are you talking about, Mary Berry?
Stunning album. One thing I'll say is, on nearly every other playlist we've ever done, this might have been my favourite album, but I think for me there was a lot of strong competition on this, and it probably didn't break that. But it's a stunning album.
Can I ask? Is this one of the one? Can I remind me? Is this one of the ones that came off Deep Cuts?
It's Deep Cuts number one. Yeah, Deep Cuts number one.
Okay, so you're not so smug about me choosing Deep Cuts now.
Well, let's talk about Deep Cuts number 2 in a bit, and we'll see how it goes.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, so, okay, sounds good then. That's one down.
All right, well, over to Nirmal. Nirmal, which of these albums were you most surprised to see on an end-of-year playlist, an album of the year playlist?
The end of the year, I was the same Vincent. I was very surprised to see that, and on 2 lists, right?
The top of 2 lists, top of 2 of the list we chose, yeah. Exactly,
and so as I listened to it, and I could see why it was rated so highly, but I can't say that it really grabbed me. I think it remained maybe a little bit too pop for me ultimately. I certainly couldn't get into it. I liked some of the lyrics, especially when she's critiquing the media and such. But I don't know. I never really felt like.
I thought it was really interesting the fact you raised pop there. Just to interrupt for a second, I thought it is an extremely pop album. It's kind of an experimental pop album, but it's extremely clean. But not in the way of the previous album we were talking about. It's clean and polished in a kind of shiny, slightly sickly sweet way, I have to say. And in that sense, that's one of the reasons I wasn't really that into it. So I don't know. I kind of, in that sense, I think I might be agreeing with you, Nirmal.
I'm also going to interject here because I've written about pop in my notes as well.
Oh, okay.
To say that it comes across as a very poppy album on the first couple of listens to me, but then I think the lyrics. I think what's going on is that the lyrics are so dark at times on this album that I think she's sort of masking the darkness, and I think
so that's very
I think
much
you're
like...
both missing the point of the album. I think the whole point is it's a bit of a comment on the current sort of pop climate and the celebrity culture.
I mean, I think
and she's masking.
I don't know if she's masking it very well then, because there are certain tracks like "Pills" I thought was extremely irritatingly heavy-handed. I mean, it's just I get it. Yeah. There are pills in every context in our lives, and we're ruled by this, kind of drugged up state that we're in as a society. It's not a subtle point. I don't think it's the first time I've kind of heard of it before in tracks. So I don't think it worked out that well. So I don't think it was that subtle, and I don't think it was that effective either.
I think there's times when I find it. I mean, I'm not sitting here. This wasn't one of my favourites on the album, and it's not my favourite of her albums that I've listened to by quite a way. I was quite surprised to see it top 2 lists. I do think it's a good album, but I was surprised to see it that high. But I think the song Sugar Boy, for example, it sounds really, really poppy. But if you listen to the lyrics, it's all about like a woman giving herself up to a man and letting him do whatever he wants, and it's kind of very relevant to a lot of what's going on in. I mean, I might have picked this as my most relevant to the past year because I think there's a lot about the current climate.
I think it is about that. I just think it's not subtle about it. It's not slight. And I also think the album that's like what you're shooting for but works much more successfully, I don't think we've covered in these podcasts, is Everything's previous album.
Well, you say that. You say these for every question that ever get asked.
I love Everything's album.
You can't answer every question of everything.
Well, I'll try and avoid ever saying it again now. But that's a really dark album that really dresses itself in a lot of pop kind of fun and energy. But I don't know. It just seems to be a more subtle and a bit more elliptical than this one is. No, but you were going to say something. I interrupted you.
The line. I mean. I can imagine this line of mass seduction. Like, what does she say? I can't turn off what turns me on.
Yeah.
That is really a 2017 statement. I mean, I can't. Maybe of all the lyrics that I've heard over this album, that statement, I can't turn off what turns me on, had to be. Really stuck with me, and I can imagine that line probably was the centerpiece of this whole album, and it sort of evolved from there. But ultimately, I don't know how deep that statement is. Unless you, I don't know, think about it in terms of some of the issues that Somi brings up in Petite Afrique. It gets a little. I don't know. I felt like St. Vincent was a little. It was a little shallow, ultimately.
I mean, for me, I think that's a persona she's aiming for with this album. Yeah. I think if you look on the cover with, it's basically a picture of her bent over.
Yep.
And if you saw any interviews she did.
Oh wait, hey, let me look. Hold on.
If you look at any interviews she did during the release of this album, she was purposely trying to. She was very distant. She was acting like a persona, and I think that shallowness is meant to be there. I think that's why maybe you're seeing it at the top of a couple of lists, because I think it was a
it's
character.
Interesting because it's an interesting conundrum,
isn't
it? Because you're trying to demonstrate a characterization of something that's actually, I don't know, repellent, but not very. I'm not very keen to see. To be shallow, to write an album about being shallow. Yeah. How do you avoid it just being shallow? I mean, if she does it 100% effectively, then the album becomes what it wants to critique, and that's my worry. I think she's obviously very talented in certain ways. I understand she's a fantastic guitarist, for example, and all this. And there's loads of things that are positive about her, what she's capable of doing. But this album doesn't really speak to that for me. But yeah.
Sorry, I'm not really paying attention. I was just looking at the album covers.
Oh my god. Wow, 2018.
You're one of them, Nirmal. You're one of the people she's singing about.
Yeah, exactly.
Am I embodying her?
Is that what you're doing now? You're trying to be shallow and get into the theme of mass seduction.
He doesn't find it difficult.
I really can't turn it off.
Oh, Jesus.
I don't know if that's
All right,
maybe
with that,
time
you've just killed that album's conversation now.
Yeah.
So what was next?
I want to now go to Nirmal and have him introduce his album of the year, which we've not given the name of or anything yet. So go ahead, Nirmal, tell us your album of the year and a bit about it, please.
All right. Well, I picked Valerie June's The Order of Time, and it's her second album, actually, and it is, I think, an incredible piece of work, mainly because she takes her very, very unusual voice, which is sort of a nasally, lower toned voice that could be incredibly annoying, I think, in circumstances, and makes it into an instrument that is soulful and deep and powerful. And I think I will say I've been a little influenced by having seen her live, and this particular show of her doing this album was so powerful in the sense that there would be stretches of 10, 15 minutes where there would be no instrumentation. It would just be her voice, and you kind of just forgot that, she had this whole band behind her.
Sorry, are you saying she was singing a cappella for long periods of time?
Yeah, exactly, a cappella, wow. But it was just her own voice, and she was carrying, it seemed like I'll talk about this a little bit with the Residente, but she seems, like, her voice seems to convey multiple registers at the same time to me, and so I think her own ability to perform is influential on my listening to this. My favorite song on this album is probably Astral Plane, and she talked about it in her live show as a dream that just came to her, and she got up, wrote it, and recorded it very, very quickly in a day.
Wow.
It sort of became the genesis of the entire album.
Wow.
Is she local to you in Atlanta?
No, she is a New York, London based.
Okay.
Oh, really?
Okay. Oh, really? I didn't know that. I never do my research. That's. I'm just going to admit that now. I have no idea what any of this stuff is about, so I just drop in at the last minute. Yeah. So, are you done with your sort of intro there? No more? Is there anything else you want to add?
Nick, you have, you should continue.
Thank you so much. It's funny because you actually, I did like this album, and it grew on me as well over time. So I liked it, a good amount. But when you talk about this annoying nasal tone in her voice, turning into an instrument, that is a really tall order, isn't it? I mean, if it's fundamentally irritating, and I will say that, in my own music production, I quite like to generate things that are irritating. I feel like that's kind of what my personal God's Portishead would love to do, is find something that's like grating and push it as far as they can.
You're very successful today.
It's more difficult than it might be with other instruments to do that with a human voice, though. I would say, and that's one of the really challenging things about this album, is that I did find a voice off-putting at certain times.
Really?
I did. Yeah, I did. You want to disagree?
For the first time ever? 100% want to disagree with that. I mean, I love her voice. I love how changeable it is as well. I love that there's different registers on every song and different tones, and you Astral Plane compared to like Love You Once Made or Shakedown. It sounds, you can tell it's the same person, but I think her voice is just brilliant and also really multifaceted. I think she's great.
Did you know of her before, by the way?
I'd listened to this album once before because I wanted to include it on an earlier episode of Picky Bastards, but obviously Nirmal already knew it really well, so I didn't. So I had a quick listen, but then it kind of fell off my radar. But yeah, I've now that I've listened to it a lot, I mean, I think it deserves a place on any album of the year list. I think it's a really, really strong album. She's a good storyteller. I like the mix of sort of, there's a few upbeat tracks in there that give us a bit of the right atmosphere, but like it's really her slow sort of ethereal stuff that really shone for me. Slip Slide On By and Astral Plane were my two favourites. And I think it's a good choice, Nirmal. Well done. I'm impressed.
He does
be
this every
patronising
time,
at the end
even though, yeah, okay. Just like he critiques me when I pick an album blind,
But
and it's
Nirmal
not
did
something
pick
he
this.
likes. I know he
Yeah.
did pick this, but
Yeah.
still.
But yeah, I mean, I can't get on board with the idea of a voice being irritating.
I mean, it sounds like Nirmal can, and even you can, Nirmal, yeah. Even though you,
Yeah, it took me a while. Her first album, I was really, she sings about being in Tennessee a lot. I think maybe she grew up in Tennessee,
right?
but now she's all over the place in New York and stuff. But her song sounds like it's coming out from some very strange orifice.
Wow. Vocab is everything, really. I mean, just make wise choices, Nirmal. Come on.
But it's just I've never heard anything like it, and I love the melodies as well. Of course.
So
did you get nothing out of this album, Nick? Then really?
I mean, I really haven't got many notes to say on it because I just felt like I enjoyed it. It sort of went. It kind of slid past me to some extent. I wasn't really gripped by it, and I did find some of the vocals off-putting. So I think maybe I should give it another go. I'm willing to accept that, but there's nothing that leapt at me as kind of like very powerful about it. And I think it was, I think you might argue that some of it is in the genre of another album we're going to talk about in a minute that I picked, but only not executed to the same degree. But that's we can. Yeah,
this is going to be fun as we move on.
Let's jump on to the next one then. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to stick with Nirmal for a minute, and Nirmal, tell me if we haven't already spoken about it. Which was your favourite of the 6 new albums?
The Residente.
Okay.
I loved this album so much because of it was it was kind of like a greatest artists of all world music kind of coming together, or a bunch of world music artists coming together. I was surprised and enamored every time I.
Do you happen to know if it's like a supergroup or something, or are you just saying that in terms of its quality?
I don't know if it's a super.
I know it isn't. I've read a bit about it. It's not but his aim, he said, was to create an album that felt like a world music album. Or it wasn't initially his aim, but that's how it ended up.
Okay.
So really, I was so enamored. So it begins with this Lin-Manuel Miranda piece, and then it has the Tuvan singers in it. I mean, who has the Tuvan throat singers in a sort of hip hop and rap art, And then it has Goran Bregovic from the Balkans in it, and it has just these amazing people from all over the world on it, and I loved it, even though I understood almost nothing in terms lyrically from it, because I don't speak Spanish, so I don't know what the heck was going on most of the time. But musically, I was just I was loving it. I was loving every moment of it.
Mm.
Right.
Would you say you're generally a fan of the genre, or any of the genres?
Does it have a genre?
Yeah, any of the
I don't
genres
know. I don't know which genre it is, but I love. So the Tuvan song is probably, I love the Tuvan throat singers. It's and so they can do those multiple registers in that same voice. With one voice, they have this high and low simultaneously through one person singing it, and every song is about the love of horses.
Are you being serious with that?
I'm being serious. Yeah, every single. And if you listen to it, it sounds like every song is kind of like in this galloping sort of tone.
What's happened?
Wow.
Yeah. It's crazy. Wow. But then he mixes that into this kind of hip hop, stuff, and it's pretty just amazing.
Why don't you go into your commentary about it?
Do you want me to jump in? Okay. Well, I think me and Nirmal might fall out here. I thought this was. I was really excited about listening to this album, and I think the concept sounds great on paper. I think it's even though I understand a bit of Spanish, but I don't understand it all. I imagine this is quite a political album, but for me it was a mess.
Yeah, I guess. The world is a mess, isn't it?
It was a very good concept, but for me it was terribly executed. I think I get why it's been fawned over and why it's in so many, because I've seen it on loads of best of the year lists, and obviously people do like it. We've just heard Nirmal. Obviously people like it, but I think for me it's the concept is such an interesting original concept, and it's quite of the moment, which I thought you might pick as the answer to the question about 2017, but then just the music for me, I mean, it's so dramatic. I just felt a bit.
Is it a bit of Perfume Genius-y for you?
It might be worse.
Wow. He hates that album.
I mean, I think I just felt really No, it's not worse than I'm going to take that back. It's not worse than Perfume Genius. But I felt really overwhelmed by the sounds. It just buried me, really. And yeah, I just found it quite irritating. Sorry, Nirmal.
And I don't think we can really defend it as, symbolic or symptomatic of 2017 by being a mess, because things are a mess. I mean,
no, but that's not why. What I think is it's like.
No, I'm not saying you're saying that. I think that might be a defence that Nirmal might have been implying earlier.
What I wanted from it when I sort of heard about it and saw what it was about was I thought, it could have been a really powerful message in 2017. It's a Puerto Rican rapper. It's bringing in lots of elements from all over the world. It's there's a lot of messages that I felt could have been intended or could have come across, but for me, they didn't come across because I couldn't cope with things like throat singing and banger and all the stuff that was going on. It was too much.
Yeah,
I needed paracetamol.
Okay. So I haven't got a hell of a lot to say after both your quite detailed and totally diametrically opposed opinions on it. But I will say that this is almost the album of all the ones we've done since we started this where I've had the biggest problem trying to find something to kind of dig into. And it's very obvious and simple answer to that. And that is fundamentally, if I'm anything, I'm a writer, really. I mean, it's a training, like I'm a writer, So it's totally, I'm taking it on myself as my flaw here. But if I can't understand lyrically what's going on in an album, it's extremely difficult for me to get behind anything else in it.
Could have Google translated it.
I could have done, yeah.
Yeah.
I was obviously too lazy to bother with that. But so I just, it was really, really hard to gain any traction on it. I did think it was, there was a lot going on. I can see where Fran's going with that. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not really sure. But ultimately, if I can't follow anything about it, I mean, when you say you thought it was a political album, probably, maybe.
But I'm just guessing.
Exactly, we are guessing. I don't know if Nirmal knows any more about the language than we do, but I have no access point to it.
Yeah, and I think we're all at a loss, not understanding the language.
I'm not saying I hate it, therefore I'm saying I can't make a judgment of it for that reason, and that's my fault, not the album's fault.
I mean, I think to talk about the language, I think that's what I assumed would be the barrier for me with this album, even though I do speak a little bit of Spanish, but it wasn't the barrier in the end. The barrier was something more than that. I don't think if it had all been in English and I'd understand every word, I would have been able to get into the style of it.
I think this is a world music genre, an album for people who love world music as a genre.
Yeah.
Because it has like so many of those kind of, greatest hits sort of from people in that genre. And so they kind of see it. So I can imagine a bunch of it just seemed like a big party, basically, of world music artists getting together and just putting together something that's a lot of fun. And the celebration of kind of, so many of the 2017 albums that we talk about, especially that are rap or hip hop, are pretty dark and angry and about exclusion and about being isolated. And in many ways, the nature of the bringing together of all of these world music artists in this film was about sort of communal bonding over sound.
That's a really well put defense, I think, of the album. And again, I'm not slating. In a way, all three of us have got as different opinions as we can have. One loves it, one hates it, and one can't speak to it. But I think that's a really good defense of what you're saying about it being an album that's based in something positive, and in that respect alone, it deserves some kind of time or credit.
Yeah, it was a good defense. I mean, it's not changed my mind, but
whatever changes your mind, then.
But no, I think I do think there is something in that, though, that it's maybe world music is nothing that I've ever spent any time with. I think it's a very specific. But then obviously it's made a lot. It's had a lot of traction this year. It's made a lot of top 50 lists all over the place. So and good on it. You know, I'm not. It's just not for me.
I'm glad you put it on there, because I had never heard it.
Okay.
Well, it was from your list, Nirmal. So
you put it on there, yeah. Effectively,
you put it on there.
Nice.
Right.
Okay, so let's move along. What's we'll
So
cover
I
next?
don't know if we've already mentioned the album, Nick, but what I wanted to, if we mentioned your least favorite album yet from the list.
Okay. I probably would have said St. Vincent, but I have a second place for this, which is the SZA album, Scissor,
Control,
which
Scissor.
Control by Scissor, which to me, I actually thought it was sounded. It was well produced and polished and all those kind of things, but it was extremely facile. I've got to be honest and just say it seemed really facile. The topics it was talking about, I didn't think were worth writing about in many cases, and it sounded as well extremely like the Frank Ocean album that I think we did. Did we do that last year?
We talked about it.
We talked about it before we started recording the podcast. Yeah, so it sounded very, very like the Frank Ocean album, which is not a bad thing because I thought that Frank Ocean album was all right in some ways, but it just seemed like a kind of quite flat version of that. What else do I want to say? It did have a good sort of ability to move between singing and sort of flow rapping. So I thought that was to its credit. But otherwise, it just felt like something that didn't. There was an awful lot of buzz around it, so I was quite excited to hear it. But it just felt like in the end, it didn't really have much to say for me.
Well, I'm gonna jump in because once again, me and Nick are in massive disagreement. On paper, though, this would, you say you're excited to hear it. On paper, this was the one that I was least looking forward to listening to. There's a lot about it that I assumed I wouldn't like, but it probably turned out to be my favourite album on this list, other than The National.
Oh my god!
So for me, you just said you found it quite facile. For me, I couldn't disagree more. I think what was so immediate about it and what really grabbed me was how honest and raw the songs are, and I think in this genre, usually I'm used to hearing, because I don't listen to a lot of this genre, but when I do hear stuff, it's often people singing about how beautiful they are, or how everyone wants to be with them or be them. Whereas here it felt like just a young woman airing sort of all her insecurities and talking about the things she puts herself through for a bit of affection and to prevent herself from being lonely. The song Drew Barrymore, which I don't know why it's called Drew Barrymore, I'm never going to work that out. But it was probably my favourite on the album, and I think it kind of sums up my feelings on this album. Like, some of these lines on their own sound, they don't, it's not amazing writing, but I think the whole concept of the album sort of, so there's lines with, starts the song with, why is it so hard to accept the party is over? Then there's lyrics like, I get so lonely, I forget what I'm worth, I'm so ashamed, I think I need therapy. Lonely enough, I let you treat me like this, and do you really love me or just want to lay me down? And I think the album for me was all about, again, it's another 2017 album, or this, dealing with the emotion of the expectations of someone this age and someone who's doing things that they wouldn't normally do just to have a relationship, have someone in their life. I felt it was a really confessional, really interesting album. And I've also written about Frank Ocean. I've also written about Frank Ocean.
Just get over it.
Because the thing that stopped me from liking the Frank Ocean album, the lyrics were so distant, so obscure. Whereas here, she really, there's none of that.
I thought she was very honest. I'll give her credit for that. I thought she was very open and very honest, and that's a good thing in general. I just thought in the end, she didn't really have anything to say about it. I just felt like it was.
Couldn't disagree more though.
She was just sort of saying, "I'm lonely."
But it was a real frank sort of it was a really emotional, really frank admission of loads of like feelings that people go through because of the society we live in and the expectations and I just thought it was really powerful.
What do you want to interject, Nirmal?
Boo-hoo. Boo-hoo. Life is so hard. I'm so lonely.
You just have no sympathy for...
I get shot down just because I look the way I do. Boo-hoo.
Wow, you are so forgiving.
Yeah.
Do you want to give us your actual opinion?
I liked it.
Okay. Was it like some Snickers or something?
I'm also confused by Drew Barrymore as the song title, but it had a great melody to it, didn't it?
Yeah, it's a beautiful song.
It was really, really nice. And it was very raw, and the Doves in the Wind was really harsh. I mean, that was hard to listen to, about it was really painful. So I thought, in terms of having something to say, I think, I feel like she has a lot to say, but it's a lot of working through some very central trauma. So it feels a little like repetitive, I think, to me, because it's a constant kind of going around the same sort of issue, which was for me, as I was kind of like constantly, the sexual trauma is insistent, all throughout, and and so for that reason, I thought maybe it's a bit repetitive, but it's raw and intense and kind of hard to listen to.
Wow.
And she has an amazing voice as well, I would say.
I think she's got a good voice. Yeah.
Which I think, the again, a bit like I said about the St. Vincent, the sort of the darkness you can sometimes forget the darkness if you're not listening carefully because of the voice. But I just think it's a standout in this kind of genre. Like, you're so used to singers like Beyonce just singing about how amazing they are, and I find it really refreshing, and I can see why it's been so highly rated. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'd say to modify my thinking slightly that I hope that more comes through from her, and I think that it might develop in its complexity in later things, because I think she's got a lot of skills. But I don't know. I mean, to use the term trauma, I mean, that just sounds so much more intense than I got from it. I just didn't.
Oh, I definitely know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the trauma of being she's very young, and the trauma maybe is different to what you experienced as a young person.
How do you know?
Quite a while back. Well, I can't imagine you went through the same, what I would call trauma. And yeah, I mean, I would agree with the word trauma, definitely. I want to point out as well, just because I think it adds a bit more credence to this album. Oh, I think Obama picked it as his album of the year, so
okay,
there you go. I think that says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's it now. It's easily my favourite album of the year. That's
what do you think Trump's album of the year would be?
Not Residente.
Some country song.
Nothing on this list would. No.
Yeah. No, I can't see it. All right.
Has he written an album himself of anything? Because that would be his favourite album of the year.
Yes. Yeah. He's probably been featured on something like on the Muppets or something.
Fox News theme tune?
Yeah, exactly.
One of those.
All right, so what's next then?
So I think I'm going to talk about The National now, my album of the year.
Right.
So
The National's Sleep Well Beast.
Sleep Well Beast. Let me find my notes, and I'll be back with you. You two are, talking among yourselves for... No, it's okay, I've done now.
Okay.
So, yeah, okay, I want to start out by talking about how predictable I am. So... Last year I picked Radiohead as my album of the year, and this year I've gone with The National. So okay, yeah, I'm very predictable. I do listen to other stuff, but I think in both cases we've seen an example of a band actually reaching a late career peak that rivals, if not betters, a lot of what's come before it. For me, this is such a strong album which maintains the tone and feel of the music that's in their fan base, but also pushes some real new boundaries for one of the first times. I know it's only sort of a bit of electronic and a bit of synths, but it's hearing the stuff on Walk It Back and Guilty Party and Sleep Well Beast, the song Sleep Well Beast. I thought it was quite impressive how they managed to make these changes without compromising their sound. For me, it also has the best opener they've done since Fake Empire, in the song Nobody Else Will Be There. And I love how they switch the sort of energy levels again in the first 6 songs. Sort of the 1-2 punch at the start of an emotional ballad in Nobody Else Will Be There, followed by sort of an angry, energetic song with The Day I Die. And then for me, if we're talking about combinations of songs, it's got the best run of 3 songs on any of their albums so far for me, with from Empire Line, I'll Still Destroy You, and Guilty Party. which I think is where the album really levels out and hits its peak. And I'll Still Destroy You, which I just mentioned, is for me possibly a career best for them, and definitely a top 5 national song. Lyrically, it's incredible. Only maybe Baby Will Be Fine from Alligator would better it. And yeah, just again, they blow my mind with the lyrics, and with, I think there's a lyric in I'll Still Destroy You, which is up there with the best, which is, the sky is getting white and I can't find a lighter anywhere. I'm going crazy, but I'm not crazy. Put your heels against the wall. I think you've got a little bit taller since I saw you. I'll still destroy you. And I think that last line sort of talks about where the real power of this album comes from. It's finally them really relishing in the themes of like family and relationships, and yeah, I just think it's an incredible album. Which 7 albums in, and at their age, I was really impressed with. So I'd love to hear one of your thoughts.
No, we'll go for it.
So I love The National, and I've been a big fan of theirs since I was introduced to them, I think like 5 years ago.
I feel a negative coming down.
I do as well.
I had some difficulty finding where the new contours of sound and lyric were for The National here. I thought the sorrowness of his voice, Behringer's voice was still there. I thought the irony was still there. I think he seems almost reluctant to, say his next word most of the time.
Yeah.
Which is kind of awesome and annoying at the same time, but really kind of moving. But I don't know if there's anything on this for me that was any better than High Violet or the album about the Boxer. Phenomenal. So I just I had trouble. I mean, I enjoyed the album, but I just don't know. I think I would still prefer to listen to their older ones.
Well, he's going to break down into tears now before I even begin. So for me, it's interesting he says about the Radiohead selection. Yeah, he is predictable, first of all. But the Radiohead selection, I agree with a lot more than I do in this one. The Radiohead selection, to me, it is close to a peak for them, and it is managing quite remarkably to do something fresh after this many years. I think my biggest concern was that I heard a lot of comments and reviews and stuff at the time when the album came out saying it was quite radical, it was quite a departure. And I, to be fair, on The National, I think they're in a real rock and a hard place sort of situation at the moment, or at this point in their career, because they have a sound. It has worked very well for them, and they've had great albums. And I'll say, as I've said before, that I really love this band in general. They have a lot of those kind of tones and that kind of style. But if they do it again and again, you'll get the reaction like Nirmal just gave us, which is, I feel like I could have heard the previous album and it would have been at least as good, if not better. Or they can try and do something a bit more energetic, a bit more maybe danceable, or electronic, or those kind of things. And if they do that, they risk the other side of it, which is this isn't them, or this doesn't work for them. It's not playing to their strengths, you know. So I totally sympathise with their situation, and it's a dilemma. And they've tried to resolve it in the best way they can. To me, songs like Day I Die don't work that well, and that's the reason.
Is an incredible song, man.
Day I Die to me doesn't work that well because the energy doesn't fit with particularly his vocal position in the mix. He's so low. I mean, it just pitch wise, he's so low, and he's quite prominent. It's really hard to get the energy to really come across. I think it's not styled in a way, and that's not he has the voice he has, and I think his voice is beautiful on many, many tracks. That's an example one where it doesn't work that well. So some of those cases I was concerned that they were trying to reach for something that wasn't playing to their strengths, but as Nirmal implies or says, they also risk the other side of that, and I sometimes felt like that, like, this is a good song, is it better than, say, Fake Empire? Is it better than something off High Violet? Some of those late songs in the last 3 songs of High Violet, which I love. But I just don't know that it was. So to me, I didn't hate the album. I think it's nice, it's interesting, but I don't love it, and that's really why.
What was his other project? It was LV or
Elvi, yeah.
Elvi. Like that to me sounded really different from the National.
I mean, I suppose there's only two people involved with the album, wasn't it? So it's not as big a band. They haven't got to and it is different for me. Though I think I take on board what you guys are both saying, but I think I don't think they'll ever change too much. And I think, as I said when I used them as my my introduction on an earlier podcast, they've got this fan base that loves them for what they are. And I think for me, the little changes that they made in this album, like just bringing in a few little different things, is enough of an evolution for me. And I think for the majority of their fans. And
maybe
I think
it's just because it was sold to me, not by you, but sold to me by various things as radical.
It shouldn't have been
and
called
then it didn't
radical,
come across as radical.
No, it's not radical.
It came across as nuanced.
It's not radical, and it's not. But I think that's a radical departure. I think they're not the kind of band that should do a radical.
They're not
departure.
a Radiohead in that sense.
No, they're not. No.
So, or
and they're not the kind of band that should do a
that.
radical departure. I don't think, because I think there's a very specific thing that people love about them, and I think for me this album does that specific thing very well with a few new additions, and it does have. I mean, that run of 3 songs that I mentioned again, Empire Line, I Still Destroy You, and Guilty Party, they're up with their best songs for me. And you're both wrong about that.
Okay.
My analogy would be it's a little bit like what U2 did in their last album, right?
Oh,
I mean, it's
wow.
It's a very long time since I listened to U2, so I can't comment on that.
He just punched me because you weren't here. Like I just got like a beating just because of that. I mean, it seems so wrong that you should make that statement from far away.
I can't comment. I have no comment to make. But what are you? Any songs that you guys thought particularly stood out, or was there nothing that stood out to you?
I like Day I Die actually quite a bit.
That one was my least favorite. I liked System of Dreams in Total Darkness to some extent. I liked the one of the 3 that you referred to, Guilty Party.
Guilty Party.
Yeah. There was some nice stuff on there. So I don't know how a band proceeds. This is why the bands that I've stuck with for long periods generally are the ones that do really, really oddball things. Like PJ Harvey from Dry to White Chalk, with Songs from the City in between. That is a weird set of albums. And Radiohead is an obvious classic example of that as well. So if you're going to release, 7 albums or 9 albums?
They're on 7 now.
7 albums, yeah. If you're going to release 7 albums, then it's really going to get harder and harder to keep, performing that way and making something new. So, yeah.
I mean,
I feel like Yeahs are in the same boat, if they kind of stop producing stuff for a while, but, another one, they're just having a hard time, I think, finding...
They are. And I actually liked, in that case, I liked their more strange, more electronic stuff they did later on. Some of it, the last album was pretty weak, but some of it we'll talk about another time. But there was a bit of a change of direction. People hated it. I think people hated that. So I can see what Fran means. They're risking a lot to move that
keep
much.
Doing this album again and again, I'll be happy. I think that's the thing, though. I think they've got such an ardent fan base who love the band for what they are, that I think they are a band that can keep releasing similar-ish albums. But I mean, for me, this did test boundaries, and it did make changes. And lyrically, it's a little bit different. There's more of a sort of, I think there's more storytelling in some of the lyrics, and for me, I think it made enough change. And I think that's what they've always done for me, the National. I think each album's been a little bit different from what came before, and that's kind of enough in my eyes. I don't need someone to drastically change every time.
Okay.
Although I like bands that do as well, but I don't need that.
So, let's move on. Why don't we is there a particular structure now? I just want to pick one of the others.
Okay,
so why don't we, in that case, I'll give Fran a gift and he can talk about Oxbow.
Oxbow?
Yeah, do you want to talk about Oxbow?
Yeah, I mean, Oxbow, to be honest, I'll start about Oxbow, but there's not loads I'm going to say because I can't find my notes.
That's why you're going to say bugger all, yeah.
Because I just didn't feel anything about this album, really. It was... You talked about... actually, one thing I did feel strongly about this album, you talked about Valerie June's voice being annoying. This guy's voice was... Well... Was he dying?
He restrained himself.
Was he being killed throughout the album? That was the one thing that stood out to me. His voice was a bit horrible, but
he had a hamburger in his mouth the whole time.
Yeah, I can't. Another thing, I can't understand how this is anybody's second favourite album of the year. I just can't. I mean, The guy, actually, Deep Cuts, who included The National in their top 20, by the way.
Yep, they did.
Which they were correct about.
Yeah.
And also included a few others we've spoken about in the past, which I can't remember off the top of my head. But there were so many better albums in their top 20 than the Oxbow album, for me. There was a track I liked.
And this was his number one, wasn't it?
This was number two.
Number
Somi
two,
was
right.
Somi was number one.
Right. Got it.
And Somi or Somi is 50,000 times better than the Oxbow album, I would say. There's a track called "A Gentleman's Gentleman" that I kind of liked a little bit, but I'm done.
Let me jump in then and say I'm really I'm pleased I can give Fran this gift of saying that I really like this album.
I'm not surprised.
I would have picked this as if I'd picked a favourite of not including my own personal pick for the album of the year. This might have been it.
I knew you'd like it while I was listening to it. I knew it.
And that's why you hated it.
No.
I think things I liked about it was very so it did, and this is to the point of crossing the line into a little too much sometimes, it did sound very like Slint to me, the 90s band Slint, if you know them or into them, who I really, really like, and are very kind of narrative based in the way they sort of almost talk through songs, but he has a vocal versatility I really enjoyed, actually. He moved around things. He was doing these weird kind of like screeches, and then suddenly he would speak like a normal, like a just normal narrative sentence, and then next it would be like a high pitch. It was a weird selection. It was jagged. I'm not suggesting it was beautiful. I'm suggesting it was engaging. You didn't know where it was going to turn next, and I thought that was worth something. To me, it was also reminding me a little bit of the way that Idol's album worked, only a much slower down version. I don't think I was actually that fair on that album during that podcast we did a while ago. I feel like that's grown on me a little bit, and as something that's kind of aggressive and dark, but stripped down and spare at the same time. So.
You're talking about Idols now, or
I'm talking about both of them to some extent, but
yeah.
The Idols is a bit more mental, of course. But the Oxbow album was good. I would not put it in my top 3 or 5 or possibly 10 of the year, but certainly not. It's not there. But it was an interesting album, and I enjoyed it. And again, if anyone is a fan of Slint, I would recommend trying it out. And if you're not a fan of Slint, then definitely try them out. They've been like they've had one classic album from about 25 years ago that everyone loves. So
they like Oxbow.
They like Oxbow. They're better than Oxbow. They're much better than Oxbow. But I think there's a similarity there.
Come on, Nirmal. Take a side. Take a side.
Yeah, pick a side.
Oh man, this was definitely the least pleasant album.
Is that a bad thing though? Is that a bad thing to be least pleasant? That's my question.
Yes.
Okay, so we're looking for like smooth.
I think pleasant's maybe, because pleasant's not a great word, but enjoyable.
I'll stick with pleasant because it was so pleasant. I really would listen to it, and I just thought he was a predator and awfully.
Oh my God!
Cruel. I mean, there's a song. I don't know what it was, but it just sounds like he's possessed by some kind of demon and coming after me, and it's really scary. So
again, is that a bad thing?
maybe that's a good thing. It's very.
We got to be careful of getting into the mode where we consider good albums to be the ones that are the most polished, because that's not always the case.
Oh no, definitely not.
To that degree.
Definitely
I don't
not.
think so either, but
Okay.
I also don't want an album that feels like a colonoscopy.
Violation.
You both went with the same thing at the same time.
Which is what this felt like to me.
I mean,
Audio colonoscopy.
I feel like I'm starting to like it less even as we talk about it.
I mean, I feel like this is good because now Fran has been, he's, we kind of not slated, but sort of taken down National a little bit. Like you said, he's been able to like hate on me a bit for this Oxbow choice.
There's more to come of that today, mate.
Oh, great. Great. I'm so surprised. Okay. Nirmal, is there any particular track that you hated more than any others? Or is there any track that was redeemed itself?
Was it the second or third track where it was just like this?
Are you playing the album right there? Because that sounds just like it. That's amazing. Wow.
You should start a band and then send it to Deep Cuts and you'll make the top 20 of the year.
Yeah, exactly.
Deep Cuts picked the other album that we loved, so don't.
Yeah, no, to be fair, the list was good.
Yeah, the list had a lot of good stuff
Apart from
on
this
it.
one and a few others.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, that's great then. So I'm on my own on this one. But I would defend it, and I still think... And are you a Slint fan, Nirmal? Do you know him?
I don't know Slint, actually.
Okay. Check it out. Spiderland, I think the album's called. It's
maybe
just,
you could do that.
one album, and it's
One
really
of your
good.
introductions later in the
do.
series.
Yeah,
Yeah,
could do.
the next one.
Although not if it's like an Oxbow.
Okay, so we've got one album
Kendrick.
left, and then my first. So we have to go with Kendrick now. I don't want to say have to, like it's a total trauma to do so. But
I'll start us off with
you go for it. Yeah,
Kendrick.
absolutely. And so can I ask before you start, even though, what did you think of Pimp Butterfly?
Well, that's almost
Are you
in my
gonna talk
first
about that?
point, so
Okay, go for it.
I'll go with that. So I liked To Pimp a Butterfly a lot. I got into it, but for me personally, I preferred this album, which I know you are not going to agree with, Nick, because I know not only because I know how much you love To Pimp a Butterfly, which is a good album. I don't think this album had a song as good as Black of the Berry or How Much a Dollar Cost. But as an overall album, I preferred it, and I think that's partly down to because it's a bit more in the tradition of the hip hop I grew up listening to, with just like a lot of songs that made me want to like walk about, like I was cool for a bit, and I just felt this. It just sounds so confident on this album that it just really grabbed me. It's really infectious, and I think there's a few songs on there that I loved, like Humble, which I think was a single, Element. Loyalty, which was the one with Rihanna, which I also think Nick's going to disagree with me about, just because it's got Rihanna on, and Nick can't handle Rihanna or women singing about the feelings and stuff. So that's not true.
I'm just going to stay totally silent on this. You just go for it. Just enjoy yourself.
So I'm going to say this: I wasn't completely sold on Kendrick after To Pimp a Butterfly. I am completely sold on him now. I think he's immensely talented. And he's very interesting. And I think this album maybe wasn't as political, which maybe some people will see it wasn't as good as...
I thought it's fairly political.
It's still political, but I don't think it's as political as To Pimp a Butterfly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's as relentlessly political, which I think some people might see as a negative. But then I think I had a bit more fun with some of the songs of this album. Another song I want to mention, which I really, really enjoyed, was Love, which the reason I want to mention it is because I read an interview with the guy who sings on Love, which is his name's Zakari.
Zakari, yeah.
So he had written a song which was basically that song, and he'd played it to Kendrick, and he'd heard it, and he said, "Oh, can I borrow that song for an hour?" And he came back to him 2 hours later, and he'd changed quite a lot of the music in the background. He'd written his lyrics to that song, and it was like
Wow.
2 hours later, and that song was as it is now. And Sakari talks about how much it sort of improved it, and it just shows what a talented, confident writer he is, and I think he's very impressive. I was really impressed with this album.
That's amazing.
What did you think of what did you think of the song with U2?
I liked it. When I saw U2 were on it, I was a bit shocked. But I did
You wish
like
it was
the
the
song.
National instead, yeah?
Yeah. Well, it would have made it even better, wouldn't it? But I did like that song. I did, and you couldn't fully tell it was Bono. It didn't sound quite as smarmy as usual, so I liked it. It was a good song. I don't think there's a bad song on this album, personally. I think it's a great album.
No, we'll go for it.
Yeah, I like this album. I think I would still prefer, To Pimp a Butterfly. I will say though that I think Duckworth was an amazing story and staggering in its rhymes and execution. It was just stunning and storytelling. I mean, I have these two characters in my head. I can see them. I can see their streets and where they're living, and it's just so vivid. And to end on that, all I got to say is, damn.
Oh, God.
Jeez.
Well done. Very subtle.
Just to mention, to go back on Duckworth, the reason probably I didn't pick that as one of my... It's an incredible song and an incredible story, but I think what grabbed me with this album that I didn't mention before was it's the hooks that really grabbed me with him, and it probably didn't have a hook like some of the other albums. It is an incredible song, but it was that was the one thing missing from that one for me.
So it's really nice to get to a point in every podcast. Well, there's a moment in every podcast when we actually align. And I really like this album. I thought it was very strong in almost every respect. I think he's obviously a massive talent. I mean, I think it would be ridiculous to argue against that now on this album and the previous one and the one before that, in point of fact. And I thought the album had a lot of complexity, a lot of interesting political themes. I thought it was very jarring after Pimp a Butterfly. And although I do love Pimp a Butterfly and probably still hold that album above this one, I thought this one worked really well for the times we're in terms of this fragmentation, this disillusionment about things, and that kind of like the opening story about the woman in the street. All those moments were really great. It had some beautiful music on behind it as well, with the exception of the song featuring Rihanna, which I did not like. I thought it was I find her voice just immediately off-putting, just really annoying.
I don't listen to her music, but I think she's got a great voice personally.
Oh yeah. So the U2 thing was okay. I don't know really. I don't think it added much to have U2 in it. But I could see. I just couldn't get past the sense that they were just jumping on the bandwagon, basically, to be there. And I'm kind of surprised he went with it. But there you go. But no, I mean that doesn't mean.
Rihanna?
Sorry,
you're surprised he went with Rihanna?
No, on the YouTube.
Oh, the YouTube.
Yeah. I mean, Rihanna's huge still, but U2, where they stand right now. So, but no, the narratives were really fascinating. I think obviously what drew me to Pimp Butterfly, the polished production was really nice, and the kind of mix of soul and blues and that kind of stuff. But the other issue. The issue that I didn't like about Pimp Butterfly sometimes was it was so polished, it was a little bit too much. When the Thundercat production sort of did a bit of overkill on it. So I think this album, had that over Pimp Butterfly, which is really good. So no, I don't want to slate it, with the exception of a couple of semi dubious features. I thought it was really good, really good.
I've got to just say, Rihanna, I can't see her as a dubious feature for someone like this because she's the biggest. She's huge, isn't she? And in the audience,
but he doesn't have to go with that just because she's the biggest. There's loads of people who are massive stars. Who he could have gone with. He could have gone with Ed Sheeran, couldn't he?
For me, I think he's
the biggest star on Spotify right now, isn't he?
Which Eminem's done, hasn't he, on his last album?
Really?
But Loyalty is one of the best songs on the album, mate.
No. So I thought Duckworth as well was excellent. Yeah, was it Element or Feel? One of the, somewhere near the style. Anyway, so it was consistent in its quality, if not consistent in its sort of style and stuff. So I really enjoyed it.
We have an agreement, people.
Okay, and that was soon to end. So now I guess we're onto the last one.
Your album of the year, mate.
My album of the year. So I'm going to talk about Father John Misty's Pure Comedy, and not for the first time, my album of the year has kind of come out of left field for me and surprised me. It's something that I wouldn't have expected to get into. Wouldn't have expected to get a lot of kind of fans so gripping and compelling. Mostly because it's a genre that I'm not that fussed about, really. You would expect me, if you were to go with like a cliched reaction, to look for something that was like slightly more electronic or processed or trip hoppy or something. But this album is really powerful in terms of its political statements, which are consistently very nuanced, and consistently cynical, but very nuanced. I love his dark humor in things. I think there's a lot of people who criticised him being kind of preachy, and I take that on board as a criticism. But I think there was also a fair amount of times when he's sort of self-effacing as well. So I think that kind of somewhat, not entirely, is a defence against that. But I mean, in general, it was also so beautiful. It reminded me a lot of Beck's Sea Change. If you remember that album from 2002, maybe. The first of his really beautiful acoustic albums, but with even bigger production than that. So I thought it was, and in a way, it wasn't a question of, I didn't think to myself, this is my album of the year, so much as I just came back to it so much. It just really because the stories were so interesting, and things like the leaving LA, the very I think it's 13 minutes or something, it's a long song.
13 minutes.
So was really, I mean, it takes a lot for me to focus for that time on a narrative that's so lyrically based, but I got through it. You know, I get through it a lot. In fact, I think it's a really great track. He said in an interview I saw that he wrote it to be as long as the drive to get to, I think, the freeway from his house or something. So he wanted to write this kind of long narrative about his rootedness, his attempts to root himself in a new place. So I thought that was really interesting. I saw a video recently, which I know has been floating around for quite a while, of him ranting on stage. I don't know if any of you have seen this, about the election and what was going on and how absurd the situation was, where he's like an entertainer in that context. And to me, if you compare this to the St. Vincent trying to make a statement about the modern world and various, in cynical terms, or maybe realistic terms, to be honest, this is far more clever, subtle, witty, engaging, etc. So I think that's about all I want to say about it. So why don't we go with Nirmal or well, either one. But
Nirmal.
Yeah, I loved this album so much. And leaving LA, so the best moment, really, leaving LA, the 13-minute song starts, him on a hill thinking about the big earthquake hitting and destroying the city and watching dogs and run around and stuff, up until falling in, like, learning to love music after having choked on a
sweet
candy,
and
realizing that the world doesn't really care about a child dying in supermarkets. And I was just in tears, by that. It gave me chills and made me so sad, and went back to it over and over and over again. I heard that one song, 15, 20 times over the past couple weeks, which might explain my dramatic increase in Zoloft consumption.
And cynicism.
I've just been on antidepressants like you wouldn't believe that. But I love it. It is brilliant and so funny. So funny. I thought the song of what is it? The Both Sides song. Gosh.
This is the one about the one I was going to refer to. Oh, go ahead.
Two wildly different perspectives, which was so funny. Just talking about opposition point of views that are actually the same, ultimately. Mutually assured destruction.
And it's interesting as well, compared, just to drop in one thing about the St. Vincent again, is the St. Vincent, I think, turns the cynicism and tries to dress it in pop, in kind of energetic pop, which I can see where that we've already talked about that. This does something that's just more, in a way, straightforward, which is it really dresses it in something very poignant and beautiful in that respect. And anyway, for me, that worked better, but it's just interesting how they both come to a circumstance, and they're both intelligent, capable musicians and writers. They've come to a circumstance that's a very difficult time in culture, in Western culture, and they've dealt with it in a very different way, So I thought that was really interesting. Sorry, Nirmal, I feel like I've cut you off there. Is there anything you want to say additionally?
That's right. I think the only song I didn't like was Smoochy. I was kind of annoyed by it. But aside from
it's just
that,
the word smoochy, isn't it, really?
I don't want to be smooched after hearing all of this horrible stuff. And he's very self-deprecating and ironic to a point where I do start to also think, this is a little self-defeating, but I think the humor persisted throughout, and it was really just poignant. I loved it.
So let's end on a really upbeat, kind of positive spin. I'm sure Fran's going to jump in now and tell us how much you love this album, I'm assuming.
Well, this album made me feel like I'd got on a megabus to go down to London, and I'd got stuck.
That's a cheap coach bus service down to London, yeah.
I'd got stuck next to someone's granddad, and he had decided to rant relentless at me all the way to London, and every time I put my headphones in, he would take them out and carry on talking to me, and I might have agreed with that granddad's views in a lot of the time that he was talking to me, but I wished he would stop patronising me and forcing them down my throat.
Wow, you should really see this rant he did online and on stage, because look it up, because he's much more extreme than this in that case.
It was just, I think, I'll go back a little bit and say when I started listening to it, I still love the first song, Pure Comedy. I think that's my favourite. Well, it's definitely my favourite song on the album. And I think if this album was maybe 8 songs long, I might have liked it. But it's 75 minutes long. One of the songs is 30 minutes long.
I bet you love the long one, eh?
Oh God! And it's the same all the way through. I found this such a samey album that I couldn't actually. When you're mentioning songs, I can't differentiate. I don't know the difference between the songs on this album. It's just it's a very
seamless. You mean
cynical
seamless? That's what you're saying.
Seamless, yes. Seamless rant on a megabus. But I get why people like it. I do think he's funny. I do think he's witty. I do think I do get it, and I do think I agree with his politics. But I just don't need them to be quite so shoveled down my throat in that way. And I just...
He's a good storyteller, though. Isn't the storytelling really vivid?
He's a storyteller, but every story is the same, and he tells them for 75 minutes.
So can I just be clear? Is St. Vincent or this a better album?
I prefer the St. Vincent album.
Wow. So an album with a track like Pills, it's just like pills, we take pills, we all take pills.
Yeah, but you're picking one song out there, which is the least nuanced song, and I think for St. Vincent, I didn't feel quite as... I felt like it... I think maybe what separates those two albums, St. Vincent was by far not my favourite on this. I prefer her older albums. But what separates them for me is that I felt like... I knew I was listening to a different song each time. I never knew I was listening to a different song on this album. It just felt like the same song again and again. And not a song that I loved at any point. But I do, I get it. I get why people... And also, one thing that held me back from it maybe this was a bigger issue than I've let myself believe, is that he sounds exactly like Elton John. I mean, I just kept expecting him to start singing about candles in the wind and sacrifices and... And so I don't.
What's wrong with Elton John? He's a master.
There's a lot wrong with Elton John. I'm sure more is going to come out in the newspaper at some point in the future that things that are wrong with Elton John. But I'm sorry, it didn't work for me. Irritating. That would be my word of this album. Okay. That would be my word.
Okay.
But yeah,
fair enough. Right. Well, that's
glad
so
you got some love out of it.
So good to end on such a positive spin, as I said. We're all as one.
Yeah,
it's just lovely.
Interesting that we didn't have, because last year, I know we weren't doing the podcast last year, but last year as our albums of the year we chose A Moonshaped Pool by Radiohead, Let Them Eat Chaos by Kate Tempest, and Skeleton Tree by Nick Cave, and we were universally agreed they were all outstanding albums. This year, we've not had an agreement on any of our albums of the year.
Except for other people's albums, but not of our ones.
Yeah, but I mean, on the albums, the ones that we chose, I mean, obviously, each album, I think there's been disagreement, which is quite interesting.
It just shows how deep-seated and cold our hatred for one another is.
Yeah, we've really started to grate on each other over this last year, haven't we?
Yeah.
It's also okay for both of you to be wrong. I mean, you shouldn't feel bad.
I liked Valerie June a lot. So
there you go.
I just want to put that out
there. So is you wrong on that, Nirmal?
So it's okay for you to be wrong then, Nick.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we're probably getting towards the end now. Yep. I think, but I would like to ask one very quick question. I mean, first year of doing the podcast last year. Is there any albums that have really stuck around with you both from the last year of doing the podcast? Any you can think of off the top of your head that you still listen to a lot? Do you want me to get the ball rolling? Because I can think of a couple. The Iceberg by Odyssey is the big one for me. Which I didn't pick as my album of the year of the playlist at that time, but since then, it's pretty much never left my my playlists. I've never stopped listening to it, and then also Hooray for the Riff Raff, which I know you two weren't mad on, and I've forgotten the name of the album, but the Hooray for the Riff Raff album.
Okay,
they would be my two that have stuck with me.
Paul Bearer.
No.
Has stayed with me because it's like a trauma memory.
Yeah.
I just can't get out. I wake up in the night in a cold sweat from the nightmare of that album. I'm trying to think. I liked. Well, I love the Perfume Genius album. That stayed with me. I've got that on vinyl. I know the others. I know Fran at least didn't like it, but The Sylvanesso's grown on me.
Good to hear that. 'Cause
Yeah,
I loved that.
I liked it more after time than I thought I would initially, and also the Idols I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Idols I think made a really good album, and I didn't hate it at the time, but I think I said it was one of the weaker ones on the list. But I think that's a bit unfair. It's a solid album, and it's got a lot of energy. You know, it's really good.
Still spend much time with the Odyssey yourself, because I know you were a fan at the time. Or
yeah. I listened to that a few times. I was listening to it just a couple of days ago, actually. Yeah. What about you, Nirmal?
How about XTC? I mean, that was memorable.
The memories will stick with me for a very long time. Especially that, I can't remember, Crazy Love or Supergirl. What a tune.
Yeah.
No, Marika Hackman. Marika Hackman is one of my favorite artists now. I mean,
so that's grown on you then, Nirmal, because I was a big fan, and you were 50-50 on it.
I was 50-50, and I like it more.
Well, there you go.
I'm glad we're big enough to change our opinions over time, so I'll be expecting Fran to admit that Perfume Genius is excellent by the next time we meet.
Maybe not. And one more, obviously, that we all are still listening to regularly is clearly the XX. I See You.
That's gone.
I mean, I have got it on.
It's not possible to delete the XX from Spotify because I don't own that content, and I just off my playlist, but I wish I could. All right. Yeah, that's pretty harsh.
Well,
sorry about that. Sorry, XX fans.
That's a nice place to end. You say I was negative, and then you just more negative to end the podcast. So thanks for listening, everybody.
You off with that. You started that conversation.
You're still talking, man. I'm finishing the podcast here.
All right, goodbye, everybody.
We'll be back in a month or so.
Yeah, about a month's time, we'll be back with another playlist. See you then.
Bye.